Securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through CWM, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Carson Partners, a division of CWM, LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors. This is The Way to Wealth, with host Scott Ford, a jiu-jitsu fighting, woodworking, beekeeping entrepreneur who is also the managing director, partner, and wealth advisor of Carson Wealth. Financial freedom is the goal, and clarity and simplicity is how we'll get there. Let's get to it. This is Way to Wealth.
Hello, and welcome back to the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple, allowing you the freedom to live life now. Super excited about today's podcast. I got a good friend and colleague in the industry, Garrett Gunderson, with me. So on that note, Garrett, welcome to the Way to Wealth podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. Look forward to it, man.
Yeah. Looking forward to it as well. So yeah, Garrett and I, met years ago, and I made sure that backstory. But before I do, I want to just ask Garrett a couple things. And that is, I like asking the question, first, what got you into money and this industry?
I won $500 when I was 15 for being a rural young entrepreneur. I took third place. Then I won $5,000 for taking first place a year later. And I wanted to get out of the small town of Price, Utah, into the big city, or what I thought was the big city of Salt Lake City. And so I thought, well, I should invest this. But, being under 18, my mom wouldn't sign off as a custodian. And $5,000 wasn't really that much for people to talk about or want to help me invest. And so, interestingly, one of my college friends introduced me to her dad that worked for Guardian and Park Avenue Securities as a general agent. And he offered me an internship when I was 19, which sounds awesome, but it was basically, hey, bring your friends and family so we can sell them some products. And that's where my education and life in the money game began.
Nice. And we met, I'll share this story. So, I started my career in insurance just right out of school and did really well in it. And it's part of the pattern for me of making money simple. As I've said, money was complicated for my folks, my mom and dad. And so they really lacked freedom because of it. And then I started handling insurance and benefits for people in Western Maryland, small business owners. And I've always been a small business owner and called to small business owners, and recognized this same pattern where they were just kind of, stuck because money was complicated. So I've always had this quest of, making money simple. And so how Garrett and I met literally years ago is that he had a process with Wealth Factory where he was helping business owners and entrepreneurs with making money simple and thinking differently about money. And I resonated with that because so do I. So he and I really, when we met, recognized we were kindred spirits in a lot of ways. And the one piece that I struggled with when we initially met was this whole, what he called cash flow banking, which was using dividend paying whole life. And I was like, I kind of turned my back on the insurance industry in the early 90s. Well, I've come full circle. As Garrett knows, I've read well over 50 books on this very topic. And so, yeah, it's a great tool to have, but literally that's how we met, knew we thought alike, were alike, like I said, kindred spirits. And so we continue to collaborate, work together, which I'm super excited about. Garrett, one of the questions I like to ask guests, because I feel like there's patterns in our lives throughout our life, including money. And some of these patterns happen from a young age. We're just influenced and a lot of times don't know what we don't know. There's these blind spots and these things that are imprinted on us. And I like to ask, because of that, what's your earliest, you mentioned the $500 and that piece of the story. Is that your earliest memory of money, or is something else come to mind?
No, I mean, my dad was a coal miner, and I remember when the coal mines went on strike, and him and my mom talking about being worried about paying the bills, and they were living off saltine crackers at the time, and I was young and overheard the conversation. So I started to think about, are we in trouble? What's this thing about money? How do we get it? What's going to happen? And I didn't understand it because I was so young, but I started to have fear around it and thought, you've got to hold on to whatever you've got, because that's kind of how my family operated. And the more I learned about my family, my great grandfather came over from Italy. because he was trying to look for opportunity to provide for his family, was away from him for 7 years, and my family just adopted this philosophy of like almost miserly, hold on to everything you got, cut back, reduce. And that definitely showed up in my life. My first business, detailing cars. I mean, I bought some jerky on the side of the road once, driving back home, and it was like $7 that haunted me for months. I'm like, God, that was such a waste. I could have just, and like, that's how much I obsessed about saving and scrimping. And my mom taught me how to, use a checkbook and balance it down to the very last penny. And that's just how I was raised and how I felt about money, and didn't really understand it until I didn't even really understand it when I was 19 and I started doing this internship. I really understood it when I won MDRT, $1 Million Roundtable Award, and I was talking to this woman, Nancy, and she's like, "That's cool. You're on your way up. I can't wait till you meet these people at the top of the table, the best advisors, because they just view money differently." And I was like, what do you mean view it differently? Because she could tell I was all in scarcity and cutting back and reductionist thinking. So she asked me a few questions, which led me to say, well, once we have X amount of money in the bank, then we can start thinking about kids. And my wife's a teacher, but she always wants to spend money in our classroom. She should get paid, not be paying for this stuff. And she said, I wonder what it's like living in the financial prison that you've built for your wife. And that was the inflection point for me of recognizing scarcity, recognizing my philosophy was informing my decisions. My decisions were limiting my outcomes. And ultimately, within 45 days, we had bought a home that we loved. My income went up. I think it was $170,000 that next year. And I started to invest even more heavily in myself. I let go of the scarcity thinking about every time I was paying my assistant, it was money I could be putting in the bank. I mean, it took a minute. It took a little while, even though I had this epiphany, because it was programmed for decades and it was kind of how my family operated. But by breaking free, I feel like I've made a generational change in my family.
It's powerful, man. Yeah. And so basically you're talking mindset, the difference between scarcity and abundance. And that was imprinted on you at a young age. And so good news is you recognize it. That's why I like to ask these questions, because not everyone does. So hearing a story like that, hopefully we all can relate. I definitely can. And this is where we're kindred spirits and souls, because same thing. I was the youngest of 5, and I won't go the whole way through. I've shared it on a prior podcast. So we had saltine crackers and those little wieners in a jar. And I can remember mom not eating because she wasn't hungry. And now I look, when I was older, I was like, oh my gosh, it's because she wanted to make sure we had enough. So like money was a real thing. And so that, I'm sure, is what left the mark on me, that it's like, it shouldn't be this freaking complicated, and it shouldn't be such a source of stress. Can it be a source of fuel to make you really live the most meaningful life, not, miserly, like you were saying, and chiseling everything away just with that scarcity mindset. So yeah, man, thanks for sharing. I can completely relate. And I'm hoping listeners can too. Like, that's the idea of asking that specific question. With your thoughts on like the industry, money, and we're going to get what you're up to, because I want to share that with the audience as well. Most recently, how has the pandemic changed things financially, if at all, from your perspective?
So personally, when the pandemic hit, my wife said, hey, is there anything we should cut back on? And for a very short few hours, I started to go back to my miserly ways, thinking about, oh, what am I paying for in my business that I should stop paying for? And I started thinking about reductionist thinking and cutting back and that kind of scarcity. And then it hit me. I was like, wait. Why don't I just have a conversation with these people and say, hey, the economy's changing, the world's changed substantially. How do we maximize what we're doing together and have a conversation around production rather than reduction? Because they might be losing customers or clients, and I might be able to get more attention to actually grow something. So we actually built an entire program to help people navigate the CARES Act and help people navigate ways to access money, and understanding net operating loss with taxes, and understanding the provisions where they can get up to $100,000 without a penalty. So it wasn't the funnest thing that I did, but it was interesting how when I came to that realization, I was almost to become a miser again that day. I sent a letter to my whole family, meaning an email to my in-laws, my parents, my siblings, everybody, and said, hey, look, in 2008, I learned that liquidity is important, that cash flow was king at a higher level than even what I knew philosophically before, because I watched people go out of business, declare bankruptcy, lose a fortune. And I actually had some tough times during that as well. I said, but because I learned the lesson, I'm in a position that if any of you are in trouble, I've got the wherewithal, I've got the financial means to support us, to see this through. I've set money aside. I'm very efficient with how I, with saving on tax and how I've structured I only have one loan, which is my mortgage, which I could pay off, but chose not to because the interest rates are so low. I've got all this money sitting in a captive insurance agency. I've got money sitting in cash values that even if the stock market drops drastically, my money won't go down at all. And I could access that money in about 72 hours. So I actually became a source of leadership and peace of mind rather than panic and scarcity, which was completely different than I would have been had I followed that first trajectory, which is kind of like the book, The Millionaire Next Door, which is if you live like a pauper, you too can die a broke millionaire. You can be a miserable millionaire your whole life, having all this money, but nobody would know about it and nobody would be able to enjoy it until after you die. And then your heirs, because they didn't know it existed, would probably blow it in 16 months. So fortunately, that conversation with Nancy gave me a shift. The lessons I learned in 2008 of not quite focusing on cash flow as much as I should have or liquidity gave me a shift. And as this pandemic hit, I was in a place where I would say I've never had more emails and comments and text messages of people feeling prepared, of people feeling reassured, of people feeling like they were on solid ground, because I think a lot of people have short memories. When times are good, they get greedy. When times are bad, they forget about that pretty quickly because they get back to the greed. And for me, it was more about principles and sustained philosophies. And I've really dedicated my life to that and debunking these myths and applying these things that I've learned and admitting my mistakes. And I think that's part of the reason we became so close and could communicate so well.
Yeah, right on. Exactly. And it's just so fascinating to hear that how clear you are on the abundance mindset versus scarcity but yet what a deep impression made at a young age that even someone as clear as you and all the work you've done in this area that you still can get drawn back in, and me too. So it's just why it's so powerful to recognize and be aware of where are you at mentally, and spiritually with this thought process and the power of abundance versus scarcity. I think about some of the things you said there too, Garrett, like I'm thinking about the Way to Wealth, which is our process. That's this podcast, Making Money Simple. It's all about efficiency. And at the end of the day, this whole game is about cash flow and control in my mind. So it's like all of that's leading to cash flow and control, and setting yourself up from that vantage point. Not only efficiency sets you up to that vantage point, but that control is such a big piece where it's back in sovereignty to the individual level where I got a grasp on what's going on. And it's like, what's missing here is education that puts people in that empowered state. They're not taught that. They're taught the exact opposite. And I know you think that and believe that. When I look at the Way to Wealth, and part of what we're going to talk about today is the team in Way to Wealth. And so I know you know this, and the audience, just as repetition, the way is the whole Taoist philosophy of being in harmony and living in the present moment, living in the now. That's where it's at. The two is the team. And I'm going to talk about that. And then wealth's the acronym and the foundation and the 3 buckets of money and taxes as an overlay. Today's about the team. So the one thing I want to talk about here and mention and ask you a question on is, so the 2, I use the number 2. And by the way, this came from Benjamin Franklin. It was the Way to Wealth. It was written in the 1700s, and it resonated with me because truth is truth. And so I just brought it to a modern day envelope with the Way to Wealth being an acronym. And he said TO, and I made it into a 2 because of this. My experience in the industry is most professionals and experts are ego driven and have all the answers. And the 2 stands for it's never one person. So a team's obviously more than 2, but the 2 stands for never one. Every team member recognizes it's never them. It's always at least 2. So it's collaboration. And that's what the 2 stands for. So from your perspective, what are your thoughts on the 2? And I'll word it another way. What are your thoughts on team?
Well, look, I'm not enlightened, so I still have those bouts of scarcity. It's just that they've become very short because A, I'm aware of it, which a lot of people just see that as reality, not as a limited belief system. And two, I'm really clear. I'll just call someone that I consider a peer or a mentor and talk about the situation so they can ask me a question I might not ask of myself. And therefore, I can spend a shorter period of time inside of that pain and extract the lesson. The second thing is on collaboration. I mean, look, nobody's an expert in everything. I know a lot about tax strategy, but I've never filed taxes. I'm not going to read the new tax codes as they come out. I just enjoy my life too much to do that to myself. And there's fortunately some people who love to do that. I'm not an attorney, even though I know a lot about estate planning and asset protection. So as I think about this, I want to be able to be informed, but then utilize those experts that have a depth of expertise to save me time and to be able to guide me to my best options in a way that condenses the information versus reading 300 books or surfing the web and hoping that I'm getting good advice. And that all starts to be very confusing. So when you find a comprehensive, congruent, and communicating team, life gets easier and results get better. Without that, you're assured to take on more risk than you need to. You're assured that you're going to have losses that are unnecessary, either because of inefficiency, by tipping the government, by having money going to institutions that doesn't need to happen, overpaying on interest, having duplicate coverages of costs with insurance. Some people, I think, have bastardized team to think about it. It's like sometimes in sports where you have a superstar and everybody sits around waiting for them to do something, and then the rest of the team isn't performing quite as well. So it's really about finding people that have this sickness and passion for what they do to the point where it's what they're researching, studying, or even developing and inventing. But they're also willing to be a team player so that you can have an entire team, because this is what the Rockefellers did. They created a family office, which was an office of financial professionals that only worked for them. And fortunately, with what you've done, now people can have access to that without having to have the Rockefeller level of wealth. But it is one comprehensive team that can work with multiple families in a very effective way in the way that they communicate and operate and implement. What I find is when you have that, for every minute you spend with them, you save between 10 to 100 minutes of trying to do that on your own, and you avoid the major costly missteps and mistakes that decimate wealth and really create this bitterness that you see inside of people where they feel so frustrated with money. They feel like it's so complicated and they go, I don't know what to do next. I worked so hard for it. What am I going to do? Just put it under the mattress? What am I going to do? Just not trust anyone? And that's why you see there's a lack of courage for some people to face it, because there's a lot of people that say they're financial planners, but at best are financial salespeople. That they're looking at a retirement account, a transaction, paid up front, paid on commission only in a perpetuity, and ultimately it's just not comprehensive enough to get the results. So a lot of people are misinformed until it's too late that they have a plan. What they have is a product, and there is no magic product. If there were, we'd all own it. We'd all be extraordinarily wealthy from owning that. And there would be no reason for people like you and I to ever have a conversation like this. But we know that money is a mental game. It's a very personal situation. And personal finance needs to be personal again, not just transactional. And I think one of the gifts that you bring to the world is being able to listen and pull out from people what they haven't even thought all the way through. But by thinking all the way through, the plan becomes extraordinarily clear, especially when we bring that team along to implement it.
That's it, Garrett. Yes. Which leads me to this. So I'm thinking about what happens in our industry so often. And I know I've experienced it, and I know we've talked, you've seen it. And that is most in the industry here, 10, 20, 30, sometimes if you're lucky, 40% of the conversation, and then immediately launch into solution mode because they got their go-to moves. Like, oh, I see it. I'm going to shoot that. Yeah, I got you. I helped you. And then
they're leading someone down the path.
Yes.
Selling.
Yes.
Discovering.
100%. And so when the real magic and juice is the last 10, 5%, 1%, 10% of the conversation, that bottom of the iceberg's where the majesty's at. That's where once you get that kind of clarity, we're all different. Like when you get that kind of depth and help the person you're serving get that kind of depth, then take that to these super smart people who are brilliant at what they do and collaborative. Now you can get some really good traction and a solid plan based on who you truly are and what you truly want. what happens? So as an example, what happens when you go see a typical CPA? And this isn't to put them just in a box. I'm just going to say this. What lens are they viewing the conversation through? Tax this year. That's all they're seeing is, how do I save tax this year? Is that really saving? What about an estate attorney? Typically, what are they looking at? Drafting a document. So they're not even hearing this whole picture. And then that's how you end up paying money for something that you can't even use, or worse yet, try to use and it ends really, really poorly. What's your thoughts on that?
It's almost like, I look at it like most financial planners have goals for revenue and goals for amount of assets under management. And sometimes people end up becoming part of that goal, not having the plan that they desire. And so that is a very interesting dilemma, because we hear so many good things about goals, planning, and objectives. The problem is when a customer becomes a number or a transaction, then all of a sudden it's more about the advisor's way versus the real way to wealth. And so it's a serious problem. And I had to switch how I made goals to stop being about revenue, to stop being about number of clients. Overall, I'd like to impact 1 million people and help them achieve financial independence by the time I die. But sometimes that's because of things I do with you, not because of anyone that I've ever even met, which changes that game. And so it really became about what are we really looking to do to support someone versus looking at them as another transaction number. And early on in my career, it was a number of transactions. It was a revenue number. It was making some inner circle thing or having some objective, which then meant maybe I'm pushing harder, maybe I'm moving faster, maybe I'm not listening as well, maybe I'm over delegating, and that was a tough transition. But when I saw that, I started saying, okay, I'm only going to take on the number of people that I can meet with every single quarter and be on the phone with them, or I could do in person once a year, and that we can start hosting workshops where we can dive in deeper and they can meet other people, and we can start sending out, a news. Like, I just started to think about it differently. And that was back in 2005, which completely changed the game for me and how we operated, which meant it was no longer a commission firm. It was a tuition backed by results and implementation, which was a hard switch because commission's a whole hell of a lot easier. It's just easier to do that transaction and get paid than spend the extra time. But it was what was rewarding. It's what led me to build a relationship with you.
Totally. That my thought on that is spot on, and very similar journey and path, as you know. And so my purpose in life, I put this on my to-dos when I'm planning each week. So the purpose is every moment presents itself for you to lift it. So the purpose is to serve. So like every moment in life presents itself to you for you to lift it. So this is all about service. And so, yeah, not always been that way, not always recognized it that way. It's been a path and journey for me, but that's where I've landed. And now this is all about co-creating. Instead of forcing what my goals and objectives might be, just be like, no, what's happening, in the world, what's happening with my clients' lives, what's happening in the financial markets with money, and how can I co-create with that to bring value and serve more people? So that's it. That's where it's at. So
you might hear my dog growling in the background. The wind just caught the door and shut it, and now he thinks there's someone here. So
no worries.
You want your financial person to be as protective as the dog, but then at the same time as friendly when they know it's not an intruder.
No, same. Yeah, I get it. So no, that'll be interesting to hear. It may be better than hearing me. So on the players on the team, Garrett, I wanted to ask, what players do you typically recommend that people have on their team?
Some type of financial quarterback is instrumental. And then from there, having a network that is a corporate attorney or an estate planning attorney, those could potentially be the same. A tax attorney, as you have more wealth, that becomes important. Having a tax strategist that could be a CPA. I think it's important to have some type of investment advisor that's helping you with due diligence and knowing what investments are out there. Some type of cash flow expert, a banking relationship, I mean, there might even be business strategists and things that are part of the team for entrepreneurs that become, I mean, if all these people are communicating, you have such a strategic advantage. And then insurance professionals like property and casualty or disability or medical insurance or life insurance, someone that really specializes in those types of things is really helpful as well. So I think those are some of the main players overall.
Yeah, it's you. I think you were reading off my sheet, man. So ours is this. I have it here. It's tax preparer, tax strategist, because most people think that's the same, and it's not. So tax preparer, then tax strategist, attorney, estate planning attorney, asset protection attorney, investment advisor, banker, loan officer, loan strategist. Again, not always the same. Cash flow strategist, and then insurance, life, disability, health, long-term care, P&C, which is home, auto, and umbrella. And then insurance strategist, who's strategizing all that. Benefits coordinator, who's coordinating all the benefits. And then lastly, you could either call it financial Google or financial guru. And this is just, all right, when something comes up in your life, money-wise, who do you go to? Who's your financial guru or financial Google? And we like to know that. And then our question with that always is this, because this is something that I was going to ask you as far as how to identify and find A player. So what we do on this form is then say, would you enthusiastically rehire that person? And that's such a good question. I learned this from top grading in business, in the business world, but there's so much in the business world of these best practices that are applicable to our personal life and our finances. So like on this one, within a team member, would you enthusiastically rehire them? Well, you know exactly what that's telling you. It's telling you that they're not, it doesn't mean they're not an A player. They're just not an A player on your team. Because I think everyone has the potential to be an A player. It's just not either the role. They need another role on your team, or it's just not your team. They're great. They're good. Everyone's good and they're A player, but just not on your team. So I think that's a healthy way to look when you go through this list of your team members. Would you enthusiastically rehire them and why? And if it's a yes, wonderful. Let's just make sure they're collaborating. If it's a no, well, we know what we got to do there. They're either in the wrong seat, role, or maybe we need someone else there. What are your thoughts on how to find A players?
Well, look, it would be a full-time job to find a full team of A players on your finances, because I know this because that's what it was for us is finding that. I know that's what it is for you. So that's why the financial quarterback or the proper firm is the key in interviewing them. And then when you know that they are committed to a certain level or standard and result, then they're the ones that are out there finding those A teamers. Because I mean, I can't even tell you how many accountants we've interviewed and we have a 9-month process where they fill out an application, they come to a workshop, they read books, they do trials where they're meeting with clients and we're overseeing and seeing what that's like. And then even then, there's still issues where sometimes they didn't get something done on time or they were late to a meeting. And for one individual, they don't usually have a lot of power with that, that advisor. But being that we've sent thousands of people to them over time, we have a lot of a sway to say, hey, you need to make things right with Scott immediately. And, either refund, discount, or get the result like today. And they're going to do something about that. So I think having a firm that's behind it makes a huge difference. And the crazy thing is, I mean, I've recently met with someone that's worth, I don't know if they're worth a couple billion or whatever, but as they came to one of my full day workshops, they were like, no, our advisors haven't told us any of this. So I had someone do a little audit and look over their stuff. And it's like, you would think that because these firms are expensive, they're good. Expense doesn't equal A team. Reputation might be at one time they were great, but now that they're older, maybe they grew or they hired more people or they just are resting on their laurels. What I find is that I see a lot of wealthy people stuck with, firms that could do a whole heck of a lot better.
Yeah, I see the same ththing. So when you said that, it triggered a thought of that. That's exactly right. You said resting on your laurels. And I think what happens a lot, so think about it this way. So at least from my experience going through life, I've had people so many times come do work. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Someone that did landscape. Oh my gosh, the plans were great. The pricing was fantastic. The end result was phenomenal. The third time that I used them, I don't know what happened. I had a painter came and painted the house 2 different times. Great pricing. It's something about the 3. Great workmanship. The 3rd time, the pricing was like triple. So I don't know what it is, but it's like people get complacent, and it's the same in our world. So it's like just making sure, and it doesn't always happen, but I think it's a great idea just to make sure everyone's still on top of it, being proactive instead of reactive, and not getting lazy, because that's been a pattern that I've seen.
So I had, I had this accountant back in the day for our network, and really good. But as we started to increase the number of people we sent, he had to start hiring people. All he did was hire a bunch of family members who were inadequate and inept. And we tried to give him a couple chances, tried to help him out, and eventually had to just part ways, because as an individual with a certain number of customers, he was great. As soon as it got into the place where he had to expand, and you see this a lot with accounting, you'll see either the best ones get gobbled up by a family office because it simplifies their life, or they're so good that they get so many customers that they start missing deadlines. They just can't handle it because they didn't hire one, or they hire people who aren't as good as them, or they just don't take more customers on. And we've had people that said, oh, we sent him, I remember this guy, we sent him 2 clients, and he goes, okay, I'm now not taking any more clients on. I'm like, we did a 9-month process to vet you. And it turns out you're only taking 2 people on. So we had to add a few more questions, because he was fantastic, but he wasn't looking for more clients because he knew he could service those at a certain level. So that's part of the challenge. And that's what we see happens in business quite often.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes you can just outgrow, what worked 10 years ago. Now you're 10x where you were, whether it's education, capabilities, network, contacts, whatever the case may be for that firm, you just outgrow them. And that's okay. Just recognizing it and making sure that you're getting the value that you need and deserve to make this thing simple, giving you the ability to live now and do it fully. So a couple of things on the pivot here, Garrett, just to come full circle now. We talked about how we met, lots of similarities on the path and the journey. Certainly the way to wealth, the process, are familiar with it, and I know believe in it. And we continue to collaborate to this day. One of the things I wanted to provide everyone the opportunity and you to speak about is just what you're up to now. We met years ago, and you, of course, working with business owners and entrepreneurs for so many years. Just want to give you an opportunity to say, where are you at now? What are you up to? What would be interesting for people to learn about, and then even maybe be able to participate or see what you're up to currently.
So for a long time, I've been doing workshops, and, for a long time, I also focused a lot of my time one-on-one with customers back in the day. And what I found is, if I do the same workshop over and over again, which I've probably done this wealth acceleration workshop over 100 times, I lose a little bit of the passion for it. And so I'm not as process oriented. I also figured out in doing this, as I told jokes, people laughed and learned, and there's studies saying you retain 3 times more when you're laughing. So I started a hobby in August of 2017 doing some stand-up comedy. Then in November of 2020, I decided I was going to do a full hour comedy special around the topic of money called The American Dream. And the goal was to help laugh people awake, help people laugh and learn, and also have a whole lot of fun doing it, which meant partnering with people like you that know how to sit down with someone, listen, build a team, simplify things, be able to go through a process in a way that I'm not really capable of. For example, we used to run these strategic business forums. We called them quarterly quantums even before that. They'd be these 2-day workshops, and it was more about facilitation, where I'd have to ask questions, give them time to work on it, have them work together, talk to the group. And at the end of those 2 days, I got okay reviews and everything, but I was exhausted because it really wasn't my gift. So I'm better as a teacher than a facilitator. I'm better in a one-to-many format than a one-on-one format. And I'm even more unique at being comedic about addressing things to help people learn and start things off, and then partner with people like you that I can say, hey, if this all is something you want to do something about, you got to know Scott, because he's just so dialed in at making this happen. And so I've done 2 things. One, I wrote The American Dream, and and filmed it April 15th of 2021. And, I'm going to be taking this on tour on the road. But number two, I wrote a one-man show that helps people to understand the 4 different losing games around money, the money personas, and how to really create a game worth winning and find out what their win is and have a shift from scarcity to abundance and be more profound in what they're doing and understand the philosophical construct from an emotional level, not just an intellectual level. And so taking those 2 things and bringing those on the road to help inspire people, and then teaming up with people like you that can actually implement it and put it on the ground so that people get their financial house in order, so that they get really clear about what they truly want, not just what they don't want. And so I'm now taking that on the road, excited to do that, excited to team up with a bunch of financial people in order to make sure that that gets implemented. And, kind of there's been no court jester of finance. We just keep listening to the talking heads from Wall Street that are saying one thing, doing a different thing, that are making money on your money, but saying it takes money to make money and all this kind of stuff. And so I thought maybe this is the best way to get the information out there for people who wouldn't normally look at it, and for people to laugh about it and go, yeah, that makes a little bit of sense. So leading with entertainment as the new gateway to transformation.
Yeah, I love it. And you took my word, because that's exactly what I was going to say as a follow-on to your comment, and that is the world needs more jesters right now. And so, Paul Check mentioned just the other week that that's the beauty of JP Sears, in the health space, is that that's what he is, but he's making really good, clear points, but doing it in a way that you're like, it's hard to get offended because of it's a comedy act and it's hilarious. And so you going down this space, I think, is brilliant. I think the world needs that right now. And there's real value there. It's not just having fun and being funny, though. There's value in that. There's also a message behind it, which I think, again, the world needs it right now. So appreciate what you're doing, and that it just makes sense at where we're at right now. So it's good stuff. I wanted to present it to the audience, not only because we're friends, but because the world needs what you're delivering right now. As far as any further follow-up, Garrett, if someone wanted to learn more about you or your shows, is there a way to watch it? What would you suggest is there a way for them to connect with your material?
Yeah, GarrettGunderson.com is now a new site that we've been working on that has some of the comedy bits, some of the resources and things that way. So that's probably the best way to find out some of the things we're talking about here.
It's exciting, man. Thanks for being on the Way to Wealth podcast. As always, enjoy our chats and friendship relationship, and we'll do it again here in the future. And everyone, thanks for listening to the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple, allowing you to fully live now. So we'll catch you on the next episode.
The opinions voiced in Way to Wealth with Scott Ford, Managing Director, Partner, and Wealth Advisor of Carson Wealth, are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on Way to Wealth are not affiliated with CWM LLC or Cetera Advisor Networks LLC. Carson Wealth, 19833 Leitersburg Pike, Suite 1, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21742.